Hi there, and welcome to the Money Minder review of the Autumn Budget 2024. My name's Ray Black. I'm the MD of Money Minder, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined today by Melvyn Prior, former BBC presenter for over 30 years, who will be asking me some questions about the budget that you might have in your mind as well. Hi, Melvyn.
Hi, Ray. Bit different. Instead of being on the radio, we're on the video today. But lots of things are already being discussed about the budget. And I suppose I'm just wondering to start with, did the headline leaks soften the blow of the budget a bit?
I think actually the headline leaks were the start of things to come, Melvyn. The winter fuel allowance, lots of people disgruntled about that. Some of the stuff that came out in the headlines about pension tax-free cash was really concerning for a lot of our clients and a lot of people all over the country. And it made people do things that perhaps in hindsight they didn't need to do. So I think that was a real unfortunate potential leak, but maybe they were just trying to see whether it would grab the attention. Often with these kind of things, I find that we have a red flag over here that's look at this, this looks really, really bad. When actually what they're trying to do is just distract here and then bring in something from the left-hand side, which perhaps doesn't look quite so bad.
Just
So,
picking up on something you said then about, people making decisions when the rumours were coming out before the budget. So that meant some people were considering moving their money, were they?
yeah, absolutely. And some have. Yeah, no question. We very quickly, when it all started coming out a couple of months ago, provided our clients with a comprehensive guide to Labour pension reforms. And we're very keen to put that subject right at the top because we had a number of phone calls. It started with Keir Starmer on a Radio 4 interview where he suggested that maybe pension tax-free cash might come to an end. Within 24 hours, the Labour Party were very quick to dispel that rumour. But of course, social media being what it is these days and people talk in the pub. And those that are concerned some will have made decisions that maybe in hindsight they didn't need to. It's not unusual. It's not the first time we've had that conversation come up in the press previously. Fortunately, though, it didn't happen. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the budget during the course of our chat. But I suppose one of the big things that was being sort of talked about before the budget was there will be no tax rises for working people. Did they do that?
Well, if you consider the majority of the employers in the country not to be working people, maybe. However, I suggest that there are a lot of really hard-working people that own businesses, especially in the smaller ones. Actually, no, I don't think that was the case at all. And ultimately, over the next few years, this term of government, working people will feel the consequences of the changes in this budget, and some won't be quite as helpful as they might have been.
Yeah, one of the key things that kept being emphasised was that national insurance won't be going up for employees, and that turned out to be the case. It went up for employers, didn't it?
Well, actually, if you go back to the original manifesto, they said that they wouldn't make any changes to national insurance, VAT or income tax. Clearly, that's a pledge that was broken because they have made changes to national insurance. The idea of putting the working people brackets around it was to suggest that employees in the end wouldn't notice it. But that was against, they clearly said, we will not be putting up national insurance. And they have. It's just where they've levied it to that's different.
Let's stay with that then. So how will national insurance change for employers?
Well, for the very smallest of employers that have got small payrolls, 2 or 3 employees working full time, or a number of part-time employees, because of something called the employment allowance and their ability to claim back some of the employer national insurance contributions that they pay. For those very small companies, it may actually make no difference at all, and actually it may be helpful. So there's a positive there. But for larger employees, anybody that's employing more than 4, 5, 6 people, even on just minimum wage, it's been a real hit. for every one of those employees, having brought down the threshold where employers' NICs start to get paid from 9,100 to 5,000, the employers are now going to pay an extra £615 for each of those employees that they weren't paying previously. Plus, the main rate of employers' NICs has gone from 13.8 to 15% as well. So there's actually quite a big increase, and it will affect some of those businesses' profits for sure.
Yeah, I think employers were perhaps expecting that rate rise, but perhaps it was a bit of a surprise that drop from 9,000 to 5,000 when people start coming into that sort of bracket.
Yeah, it's huge. It's straight off the bottom line as well. There's an old saying in accountancy practices, not that I'm an accountant, I'm a financial advisor. And if you need advice on your taxes, you really should speak to an accountant. There's an old saying in accountancy practices that turnover is sanity. Turnover is vanity. Profit is sanity. And the profit is the bit that's left over. It's the profit that allows companies to reinvest into their business and their staff and marketing and build the business. But if the profit is getting lower and lower and lower because of expenses, then potentially there's not as much to go back in. And I suspect there will be employers now thinking that actually to take on somebody else could be really, really expensive for them because their profit margins have dropped. In financial terms, we call it stagflation, where costs are rising and profits are lowering. And I suspect that could well be an outcome of this particular budget over the next few years. We might see that happening.
That's a new word for me, stagflation.
Stagflation, yeah. And it is all to do with, even in your own household, you know that it's what's left over that enables you to save or invest. Same for a company. It's only what's left over after you've paid everything else out that decides whether you're profitable or not. Stagflation is when the cost of everything, goods, wages, anything else that you have to pay for is going up and up, but the profits are being squeezed by that all the time. That's stagflation.
And the other thing that's going to affect profits, you touched on minimum wage. That going up, it will have an effect on a business, won't it?
Again, yeah, it's straight off the bottom line. Don't get me wrong. We've seen, although we get news stories coming out recently about inflation only being at 1.7% now, lower than the Bank of England's target. I'm not inclined to go with that. I would push back on that. Real inflation, RPI, that we've been measuring in the UK since 1947 is at 2.7%. The Bank of England's main measure of inflation, called CPIH, including housing costs, is at 2.6%. It's only if you take out the H and look at CPI, which is the one that the media tend to quote all the time, and the government and the Bank of England these days. It's only when you take the H out and go to CPI that you get under that 2% target. So therefore, if you don't live in a home, if you are homeless and you don't have home costs, yeah, okay, maybe your personal rate of inflation is less than the 2% target that the Bank of England set in place a few years ago. But if you've got a house or you're renting or you're living somewhere, actually inflation's a lot higher. And over this last 2-3 years, nearly 3 years now, we've seen the average cost of a loaf of bread, just bog standard, own brand bread, go from an average cost of 108 for a loaf of white bread to 140. That's an over 30% increase in cost of living just on what you pay in the supermarket, ignoring the cost of the gas and the electric and heating the home, lighting the home, that kind of thing as well. So that increase that we've seen over the last few years deserves for people to get a better minimum wage because they need to survive. But it's also a strain on the employers because ultimately employers in a lot of cases will be struggling with costs versus the amount that they can charge for their goods at the moment as well. So an extra strain.
Yeah, good point there. But I think it is also good to mention the fact that, if you are on minimum wage, that's a positive for you on minimum wage, isn't it?
The fact that it's gone up by over 6%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And hopefully it will put a bit more money in the back pocket. The trouble is, because inflation is still going and this budget is potentially inflationary, they're pumping a huge amount of money into things in the first couple of years in particular, and then we'll start to drag off. And what we'll see over the next year or two is a higher inflation across the country. So therefore, you might be earning a bit more, but it's highly likely, because of some of the measures in the budget, that you'll actually see the cost of goods and the things that you want to do at the weekend and spend on just normal food and water and such like just going up. So in real terms, it won't be too long before that increase is actually potentially costing people out of their minimum wage.
Yeah, and you've got a situation here where if you are an employer, you're going to have to try and cover that somehow. It could be that you won't employ as many people, or if you're an employer that sells products, you put the price of your products up.
Well, the latter one is a definite. I'm absolutely sure of that. If you put companies' costs up, whether it be from wages or the energy use or the cost of paper or whatever it is that they make, the widgets that they make, if the costs are going up, you can expect to see the costs to the end consumer go up. That's an absolute certainty, no question at all.
So although our tax rates might have stayed the same, and we're looking at that side, we're going to be paying more for goods in the future anyway.
Yeah, and tax rates staying the same is not helpful either, I'm afraid. We've not seen the personal allowance change in the last couple of years. They're now saying that won't change until 2028. A glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel was that in 2028, they're saying that personal allowances will go up. However, for 5 years, your personal allowance hasn't gone up, but your wages have. What does that mean? You're paying more taxes. Couple that with inflation, 3 years from now, people will be worse off than what they are today as a direct result of personal allowances not increasing and the cost of goods going up.
So that's a sort of a back way of getting more tax in. You don't put that rate up, your wages have gone up, that money goes into the tax coffers.
Yeah, it's stealthy, but it's not new. And it doesn't matter whether you're wearing a red tie, a blue tie, a green tie, or a yellow tie. There was no question that on this budget, tax had to go up because we have now a very expectorant society. It's big government. That means big taxes, big spending, and on top of that, big borrowing. So there was always the potential for taxes to rise, who'd ever won the last general election. That was always going to be the case. It's just that when you don't put up personal allowances and, for example, inheritance tax allowances, which we'll come on to in a bit, I'm sure, when you don't put those allowances up, more people are getting caught out by it. And even the lower earners will end up paying more tax because their personal allowance isn't going up with their wages.
Let's talk a bit about pensions. There was some positive news on the state pension front, wasn't there?
There was. The triple lock's been maintained. They needed to. Blimey, there's a lot of pensioners out there that are a bit miffed that they're no longer going to get their winter fuel allowance. Equally, there will be a lot of pensions out there that didn't really need it, but the fact that you were getting it was always helpful. So the very least they could do was maintain the triple lock and see the state pension going up. And so now a full rate, flat rate state pension from April next year will be around £230 a week. So there's about £1,000 a month, which is just underneath that personal allowance as well, that people can be confident that they will be getting from April next year. However, the year after that, personal allowances aren't going to change. They're going to stay at 12,570. And if the pension goes up again by the triple lock, the following year, even those people that are potentially living on a subsistence allowance, if it's just the state pension loan, they'll have to start paying tax. And weirdly with that, because the state pension is always paid gross, if an individual's got only the state pension and no other income coming in from anywhere else, and it's above the personal allowance, what they're also going to be faced with is a bill at the end of that year to say, oh, we paid you £13,000 in pension, but we always pay the state pension gross. And because of that, you are £400 over the tax threshold, you need to send us a cheque for £80, please. That's not going to go down so well.
Yeah. Was there a change at all in how we receive things like private pensions and additional pensions other than the state pension?
Sorry, just to clarify the question for me, Melvyn.
So, was there a change in any way that we get sort of pension-free amounts and that sort of thing? Was there any change to that?
Oh, the tax-free amounts?
Yeah.
No, that was that was fine. Pension tax-free cash was highly discussed beforehand. That's not changed. So pensions haven't really changed. What has happened with pensions is they've been brought into the inheritance tax loop now, which will upset those people with larger estates. Won't make a huge amount of difference to smaller estates, but anybody with an estate between husband and wife, for example, of more than £1 million, their pension's been dragged in to that now, that it wasn't there previously. And that is a big change. We've always been able to pass on pensions as a lump sum tax-free to beneficiaries and next of kin. That's going to be a complicated mess, I'm afraid. At the moment, it's not due to start until April 2027. But there's a bit of time for maybe some negotiation, maybe some lobbying. Then we might see a change. It might be one of those things that they decide to U-turn on. But as it stands at the moment, from April 27, when trying to sort out the estate of a deceased person that's got a larger home, savings, pension, there's going to be a lot of to and fro in between pension companies and solicitors or the executors to try and work out who's going to pay what tax from where. And that's why I'm sure that they've left us till April 27 to bring it in properly, because they're going to have to do a lot of consultation with both the legal profession, the probate department, and the pension companies to try and get that to work anywhere near smoothly. I can see that being a bit of a car crash at some point in the future.
You touched on inheritance tax. Let's talk a bit about the changes there. One of the ones in my mind, I've heard a lot of people talking about this, is a change in, the inheritance of farmland, for example.
Yeah, in the past, it's been possible to pass on land via agricultural property relief to family members without paying inheritance tax on it. One of the reasons why a certain Hoover maker has been buying lots and lots of land in Lincolnshire and paying some good money for that land over the last few years as well, building up the Dyson farming empire. I'm sure that there was an amount of, if I put it in the right places, my family won't suffer a huge inheritance tax liability. That's now just been scuppered. So unfortunately, while there'll be a level of relief that you can pass land on, some of this land at £10,000 an acre plus, good quality land, where it had been able to pass on to family members down through the generation and has done for decades, now is going to get caught. It's not the full rate of inheritance tax at the moment. There's a 50% relief on it, but the door's open. The door's ajar now. So once they get that through, there's every possibility that agricultural property relief won't be available in the future. The difference that makes to farming families is that to pay the tax, they may actually have to sell land to pay the tax, or some next generation farmers just won't be able to afford to take the farm on because when they've got rid of some land to pay the inheritance tax liability, there won't be enough to make that farm profitable.
Yeah, and I think I've heard the phrase, is it asset rich? So that they've got the land, but actually the only way they can actually get the money is to sell it, and then you've got no business or farm.
Exactly. Yeah, that is definitely an asset rich scenario with farmers. 150, 200, 1,000 acres can be worth a lot of money, but nobody takes a square of turf at the supermarket. You've got to grow stuff on it and sell the stuff that you grow to be able to then convert it into something you can actually spend.
And part of this reason for the land being so valuable is because investment companies, not small family farmers, have actually been buying the land. That's put the price of all the land up then.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think that's certainly okay. Now, If you're wanting to expand your farm, investment into agricultural land has proved it a bit more challenging to go from 200 acres to 400 acres or 500 acres to 1,000 acres because the cost has gone up so much. I suspect we will see a bit less investment from some of those large investment funds or individuals, high net worth individuals, because all of a sudden it's not quite so tax efficient on death as it was previously. That might bring the price of land down a little bit. We'll have to see how that goes over the next few years. Watch this space.
Yeah. And I suppose the advice is, if you are getting to that situation where you've got a property or other assets that you want to pass on to other people, get some advice about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And inheritance tax, certainly in the short term, nothing's changed. It's the same today as it was yesterday. Nothing's changed, particularly right now at the moment, but it is changing.
Yeah. Let's move on to capital gains tax. Let's talk a bit about that and what actually is capital gains tax and who has to pay it.
It's the tax you pay on profits. So if you invest in a share or a fund, and it's not inside, for example, an individual savings account, an ISA, where it's tax-free. That was a good move, actually. They didn't put any tax on ISAs, which the last Labour government did. They had a few quid out of ISAs and pensions. All of a sudden, we had to describe them as tax efficient rather than tax-free, because there was a little bit of a grab on the dividend income that was coming inside those tax wrappers. That didn't come back on again. And the other thing that was muted that might have come on was a lifetime allowance for ISAs, saying that any one individual can only have a maximum of £100,000 ISAs. That came out from one of the think tanks. Fortunately, that hasn't happened either as well. So money in ISAs and money in pensions, no problem from a capital gains tax point of view. But money that isn't inside an ISA or a pension, if you invest, for example, £10,000 and you take it out 5 years, 10 years later, and it's now worth £20,000. Up until yesterday, or the day before yesterday now, up until the day before yesterday, the tax that you would have paid on that as a basic rate taxpayer was just 10%. So you'd have made a £10,000 profit, and £1,000 of that would have gone off to HMRC. That's their pound of flesh on the way through. They've just increased that to 18%. So now that same investor that's doubled their money over the period of time, they're now going to pay £1,800 in tax.
That's quite a jump, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And also what's happened, there is an allowance. The first £3,000 doesn't get taken into account, a personal CGT allowance, but that used to be over 12,000. A couple of years ago, that was £12,300. It went down from 12,300 to 6 to now 3. So capital gains tax, on the bright side, it's tax that you pay only on profit, and it is lower than the basic rate of income tax. Even the higher rate capital gains tax is only 24% compared to 40 or 45 on income tax. So it's still not bad. And on the bright side, I say it is at least a tax on profit. If you haven't made any profit, you won't pay it. But if you've made some profit, they want their share.
Was there any good news for savers? You know, people who wanted to invest in other things. Was there any good news there at all?
I guess for more sophisticated investors that are happy to take a higher risk view with their investments, the fact that they kept venture capital trusts and enterprise investment schemes, EISs, VCTs, in place as they are, and they confirm that they're going to be in place till 2035. There are some places that people with larger investment portfolios and higher income can go still to get relief on tax by going into the right places, but they tend to be higher risk. It's smaller companies. So that was good news that it's still there. They didn't get rid of that altogether, so that was good news. The unfortunate side that we were expecting to have been in place by now that hasn't happened is there was, if you remember from the last spring budget, there was an expectation that we would have by now something called the new Brit ISA. Bit like the old personal equity plans, £5,000 extra on the normal 20 that you can get into an ISA, an extra £5,000, but stipulated that it has to be invested in UK companies. And that was from the last government. And that was actually, well, we were quite looking forward to getting that, because that allows people to get their non-tax-free money into tax-free envelopes quicker, because it went from 20,000 to 25,000.
Yeah.
That was scrapped. And that's a real shame, because we're being told on one side of the coin that this government is all about investing in the UK. And that was an ideal opportunity to get private money from average Joes that have saved and worked hard all of their life, give them another place to invest that would go directly back into the UK economy. And that's been scrapped altogether. And it just doesn't seem to be turning up anytime in the future either at the moment.
So not just on the back burner, that has gone, has it?
Yeah, it has at the minute. No, then it's a real shame. If you want to invest in the UK economy specifically, you've got to give people incentives to do so. And saying that you can invest in that, but pay no tax on money when you come out of it, no capital gains tax, no income tax, great way to do it. It works really well with personal equity plans. It's worked brilliantly well over the last, 20 odd years since ISAs were introduced. And there are people, some of our clients have got a lot of money in tax-free ISAs now because it's the right place to put the money. Shame that we haven't got more openings for that.
Let's stay with some pros at the moment. Beer down a penny. Wow.
Excellent. Yeah, really pleased.
Well, if you're a beer drinker, yes.
Yeah, it means that for every 500 pints you buy, you get one free.
But we always listen out, don't we? I know, perhaps people not watching the tobacco side of things so much, but it always used to be any budget. What's the beer duty? What's going to happen with cigarettes? What's going to happen with all those things? It's still a headline catcher, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Also, a headline catcher was the extra 10% on rolling tobacco. That'll upset a few people, mind you. On bright side, though, we're not paying the 5p duty on fuel, which I think has now been ignored for about 15 years. You thought I might as well have scrapped it by now anyway. It was one of those, a little nugget, I think, of, and by the way, we're not going to put that extra 5p on still, at least for the next year. But they've been doing that every year for years now.
Yeah. Let's stay with transport, because there was a lot of talk before the budget about this cap on bus fares, wasn't there? Was it £2?
Yes.
They've said the cap will continue, but it's going up to £3.
Yeah, that's a 50% increase.
Yeah.
So for those people that use the bus a lot, and they're really trying to get people to use public transport rather than private. It wasn't a great incentive. And you know what happens with caps and minimums? It allows companies to set a new minimum. They've just been given the authority to put their cheapest fares up by 50%. All government backed. Of course you can put up, and they will. Understandably, they'll all have the same national insurance issues to contend with, minimum wages going up. So they'll probably want that extra ability to pass on some of those costs to the rider on the bus as well. But I think those people that are riding the bus regularly, some will be a bit miffed about that.
One of the other headlines was the to do with changes with the non-dom regime. Will that affect many people?
Well, it will do if you're trying to make a home in England, but all of your money comes from somewhere else. The most prominent situation with this was Rishi Sunak's wife, who her family's Indian, and a very, very wealthy family at that. And her income is earned in India. So therefore, the tax is paid in India. So in the past, the non-dom status allowed her to enjoy that income coming in without any further tax liability when it comes into the UK. That's now just disappeared. If you're living in the UK and you've got income from elsewhere in the world, the government want that pound of flesh as well. Some speculators suggest that it'll mean that some of the foreign wealthier individuals that have come and bought properties up, particularly in London, Manchester, the big city areas, that kind of thing, they might not be quite so inclined to come because of that. I suspect it's more to do with some of those individuals that might have wanted to come into the UK and open up new businesses in the UK, specifically for the UK. If they're now going to get taxed on their worldwide income, just not their UK income, they might choose somewhere else to go. That's the downside of that rule.
I suppose the other thing about it is, and we've talked about all the savings, all the changes, it's to enable more spending on certain sort of areas, public spending. We could talk about the NHS, we could talk about any of those sort of things. Um, have there been some big announcements on that front?
Yeah, 22 billion going to the NHS, mostly funded from the increase in national insurance contributions from employers, 25 billion of them, 22.1 of it's going into the NHS. But that does feel a little bit uncomfortable when you consider that the NHS is already costing the taxpayer around about 300 billion anyway. So we've now got another 22 billion going in, and you'll have heard the opposition say that they've got no plan to reform. The new government are saying, yes, we have. It comes with conditions, but we don't know what those conditions are yet. One of the headlines was that they're trying to get 40,000 extra appointments in GPs and hospitals so that people can get the care when they need the care. But who's going to provide it? Where are the doctors and the nurses to be able to actually do 40,000 more appointments? A lot of them are already working really, really hard and trying to fit everything in and trying to tick all the boxes that they need to tick when they make advice or recommendations to make sure they've got everything on file and people get passed on to the right departments and such like. So my concern there is that we've got a huge amount of money going into something that already eats money, but will we actually see the benefit of that on the other side from the reforms that have actually been around for the last 10 years? There was a really interesting lady nurse on Question Time a couple of weeks ago, and she was challenging the group of individuals that they were interviewing on Question Time. And she said, I've worked for the NHS for 30 years. There's been a 10-year plan in place already. We've told you what needs to be done. It's clear what needs to be done, but nobody seems to be listening. And it feels as though we're now going to get into another new 10-year plan. But has anybody asked the staff and the people at the front end, right on the coalface, what they think's going wrong? And I sometimes wonder whether they're actually getting the feedback from the people on the shop floor, that people that do their job day in, day out, and have done it for years, know where the problems are. They know what could be improved. They know what ticky boxes they're filling in that are a complete waste of time. They know the stuff that they could just say, if you just did this, we'd be able to save a huge amount of time and get more appointments in, get better care in. Okay. Nobody seems to be listening.
It would be more efficient and potentially in the long term would save money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, it's such a big organisation, and we should be very proud of our NHS over the years. It's expensive to run, and there's now probably a lot of red tape. I know one individual that spends their time actually looking at negligence cases and is paid a lot of money to review. In fact, I know two people that are in that realm, and they're paid a lot of money to review and assess whether negligence happened at all in the first place, which is why I suspect we end up with so much red tape in our NHS. Instead of actually caring, they're filling in forms and doing things that are taking up a lot of time that I suspect some of those individuals would say, if you just let us get on with the job and didn't have all this stuff alongside it, we'd be much better and much more efficient.
Yeah, something else that people talk a lot about is potholes. Did I hear that there was some more money going in to help potholes around the country?
500 million. Yeah. Interestingly, I am very fortunate. I speak to a lot of people, and I speak to people from all different realms. And I was talking to a pothole mender just within the last 6 months or so. And they were saying how crazy it was that sometimes they'll go to a road and people have been complaining about a specific pothole in a specific area. So they take all their truck and they go to mend it, which it appears to me, I don't know whether you've noticed, Melvyn, those potholes do tend to come back, don't they?
They do, pretty quickly.
Mend them, and then they come back again. they put in what essentially ends up being a temporary solution in this pothole that everybody's complaining about. And 100 yards down the road, there's another pothole that's not quite as big, but no one's moaned about that one. So then instead of going down and doing that pothole, this is someone that actually works in the business was telling me this. Instead of going and mending that pothole while they're there, they then have to pack up all their tools and drive 20 miles to get to the other pothole that's on their job list for today, because that's the other one that people's complaining about. And even when they ring and say, well, I'm here, shall I do this one at the same time? They're told, no, you've got to go and do pothole number 534 on Ermine Way. Because that's the one that needs doing, that's the one. So leave that, go up and do that one. And they spend another half an hour backwards and forwards from one venue to another to put another temporary replacement in. And it's only at the time when the first pothole next to the original one that they were mending gets complained about that they go back there. Mad.
Who thought we'd talk about potholes on this? What was there a great deal of money going into local authorities? Was there more help for local authorities trying to keep budgets going?
Yeah, there is. There's some extra money going in, and they're able to keep more of any social housing that they sell now. I don't think it's a bad idea to let local authorities run their own budgets a little bit more, because again, they should be at the coalface. They should know what it is that needs doing and what their constituents are requesting. And so I don't think that's a bad idea at all. Whether it'll be enough or not, we'll have to wait and see what with these budgets, because there's some departments that are protected, some that aren't, and there will be feedback on this at some stage as to whether it's even enough. I think all local authorities are struggling, especially with things like the cost of social care nowadays and the amount that they're having to pay out on social care for those people that haven't got their own funds, which was really also disappointing. There was nothing in this budget about social care. The fastest growing part of the UK population is the 85 plus. Not even a mention, not even a discussion about social care. And yet it's one of the major issues for not just the UK, but for the majority of the developed economies around the world. The fact that people are getting older and it's costing more and more and more to keep those people in some kind of lifestyle that's acceptable. We really should have been putting some root and branch changes into the long-term care rules and how they work. Not a thing, and nothing's changed for years.
And the other thing on that front, going back to what we were talking about, minimum wage, many people working in the care sector are those people on minimum wage, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And it's a tough job, I think. And certainly it's an expensive job these days to run as well. And I've seen care on both sides of the coin. I've known care home owners that are struggling to make ends meet and putting in 70, 80 hours a week just to try and provide the kind of bespoke personal care, especially in the smaller care homes with maybe only 10 or 15, 20 residents. That kind of thing really struggled and worked so hard to try and keep on top of things and keep within the regulations. And equally, I see on the other side of the coin, people's life savings that are going towards paying for their care. So it does need a root and branch review, but every attempt since, well, there was something called the Care Act 2014, came out now 10 years ago, implemented in 2016. Most of it was just ignored. And we've had 3 or 4 attempts over that 10-year period where government has said, we need to address this, we need to address this. And then a prime minister gets fired or something changes and all of a sudden it goes back into the back burner and it's kicked into the long grass. And exactly the same's happened again. Such a shame. Missed opportunities.
What about the housing market? Any help for people trying to get on the housing market? Those that are there trying to sell a property as well?
No, I should say it's probably the reverse, actually. Although they're looking to build loads and loads of houses, and that might end up in some kind of funding for developers and such like. Stamp duties changing. Next year, people will pay more stamp duty on that. Buy-to-let landlords, if they were thinking about buying a property, they're going to pay an extra 5 percentage points on top of what they were already supposed to pay anyway. So the cost of buying a buy-to-let has gone up considerably. The cost of borrowing is high at the moment, and we're seeing it. If you look, certainly in the London area, in London there are, just on Zoopla alone, there are 50,000 plus properties for sale at the minute, and a lot of them have been reduced by 40% plus, reams and reams. And we remember from 1989-90, what generally happens is the South picks up the house prices, they really bloom. And then when they start to contract again, it starts there first and then ripples out to the rest of the country. And it's easy to find now properties in the Southeast and London area, 40% off what they were originally listed at, and they can't sell them. They've been around for 18 months, 6 months, 18 months, 12 months, just waiting for someone to come and have a look at the place, but they can't afford to pay the mortgage payments on it because interest rates have risen so much. In Lincolnshire here, we may be seeing 20, 25% reductions quite regularly because people can't move them on. And it's a natural outcome of increasing interest rates so much. People were buying houses 3 years, 4 years ago on a fixed rate mortgage of 2 and a bit percent, and they were maybe paying 150, 200,000 pounds. But they're not really looking at the interest rate, and they're not really looking at the cost of the property when they buy it. What they're looking at is, how much is it going to cost me a month? So they go in, especially the younger first-time buyers, they go in and they see a lovely property and think that, oh, we want to live there. And they go to their bank or their mortgage broker and ask, how much will it cost me if I want to buy this? How much deposit you got? This much. Okay. With what you've got to have on mortgage, that will cost you about £800 a month. Between us, and this isn't high wages in this day and age at all. Between us, young couple, we've got £1,800 a month coming in, £800 a month to the mortgage, leaves me £1,000 a month left over to go towards all the bills, keeping the kids fed and clothed, and making sure we get the odd pint at the weekend. That's fine, I can do that. 3 years later, they're faced with a letter coming from their mortgage company to say, oh, sorry, interest rates have risen. Your mortgage is now going up from £800 to £1,400. Whoa, hold on a minute. That's a lot. What pay rises have we had? We've had a bit. We've gone from £1,800 to £2,000. Hold on a minute. When we started on this journey, we had £1,000 a month left over. With this new mortgage payment, I'm only going to have £600 a month left over. And the cost of living has gone up over this last 2 to 3 years of over 30%. I can't afford it. Well, we haven't got enough money coming in to be able to stomach a £1,400 a month mortgage payment. And if there's no way out of that, I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing so many properties come up on the market at the minute. It's distress. And it reminds me of 1990 when we used to have something called jingle mail, where people would literally put their keys in an envelope, take it to the building society and say, I cannot afford to live here anymore. You take it. I'm moving back with mum and dad.
Yeah. Remember those days? What about the whole sort of situation about people saying, well, why didn't they raise more tax by closing some of these loopholes that these corporations have? Did a bit of that happen as well?
There's an extra levy on energy companies coming through. It's really, really difficult to try and pin down very, very large companies like Amazon to pay the right amount of tax based on the goods that they sell in the UK. So the really, really large companies do seem to be getting away with it more and more. And to be honest with you, I don't see how that's going to change in the short term. I suspect one option might be that if you want to trade in the UK, you have to register a UK company, and you can only trade in the UK if you have a UK-based company. And all of that income and outgoings is associated to the UK. Invariably, even if they do that, some companies will align their American costs against their UK costs to get an overall tax liability. So clever people are very able to avoid paying those large taxes. I didn't see anything in there that's going to change that in the short term, Melvyn, at all, I'm afraid.
Was it a budget for growth, do you think, or is it sort of just playing with numbers at the minute?
At the risk of sounding really negative, and no, it actually wasn't a budget for growth. And the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, have already said that it wasn't a budget for growth. Because whilst there's a big influx of money going in the first couple of years, it all starts tailing off over the following 3 years. And so the initial reaction you get from all this new stimulus going in now, it keeps growth at around the 1% mark before it starts falling. Now, you've just heard me say that retail price index inflation is at 2.7%. So to even keep our UK turnover, our GDP up to that kind of level, we've got to see at least 2.7% growth in GDP to even stand still. But the OBR are now forecasting that even with the changes, growth's only going to be around 1%. That's less than 50% of what it needs to be just to keep the UK economy up with inflation. So no, unfortunately, I don't think it was a budget for growth, even though that's what we were told. Having said that, they can manage to get the right money into the right hands and let businesses get on with the job, perhaps by reducing some of the red tape, reducing some of the regulation, looking at ways that businesses can be encouraged to invest, whether they be overseas or in the UK already. It might turn out to be one, but right now, that's not what the OBR thinks.
Ray, we've only just scratched the surface, so many different topics we could cover in this, but what advice are you saying to your clients?
I think at the moment, obviously we've got a bit of time between now and April 27 to consider the implications of pensions coming into the inheritance tax threshold, and it will affect some of our clients, there's absolutely no doubt. And it will affect a lot of retired individuals that have worked hard, saved hard, put the money into their pensions, put the money into their savings, and are hoping to pass that money on to their families in due course. But there's nothing we can do about that at the moment. The one thing that we can do, I guess, at the moment is keep on using those tax-free allowances like the ISAs, ensure that the investment strategy that you're taking on at the moment is in line with what on earth's going on in the world, because as we know, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. Our clients know that I'm very much in protection mode at the moment, and I think that's the right place to be. However, the UK is still one of the best value economies in the world, I think. And there may be some opportunities coming up into 2025, into 2026, where we might be able to get some really good bargains from those big companies where their profits have been reduced because of all these extra expenses, and as such, their share prices have come down, but they will in turn go back up again in due course. And look for the dips. There are now and again good opportunities come up where you can get some stock at really good bargain sale prices. And I suspect with the way things are going on globally and here at home, it may not be too far before we've got one of those opportunities arising for us.
Ray, good to get your views. Thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure, Melvyn. Lovely to see you.